Somewhere in a record book that almost nobody outside gymnastics ever opens, there's a page with one name written on it over and over again. Not because she's the best in the world, not yet anyway, but because every single time this girl steps onto a competition floor wearing the colors of the Philippines, the old number next to her country's name gets crossed out and replaced with a new one. Twice now, at 2 different world championships, in 2 different countries, she has walked away having rewritten the entry for an entire nation. That's not a headline exaggeration. That's what happened. And it happened while she was grieving, while she was sick, and while one of the most famous athletes her country has ever produced was watching his own Olympic dream get denied in real time. His name is Manny Pacquiao. Her name is Aleah Finnegan. And before we get to the year those 2 stories crossed paths, you need to understand how a girl from the American Midwest ended up becoming the answer to a 60-year-old question nobody in the Philippines thought would ever be answered again. Aleah Cruz Finnegan was born on January 4, 2003, in St. Louis, Missouri. Her father, Don, was American. Her mother, Linabel, had grown up in Caloocan City in the Philippines before leaving home at 19 to study in the United States, carrying nothing but a suitcase and the kind of quiet ambition that immigrant families pass down without ever saying it out loud. Nobody in that family tree could have predicted that decision would eventually hand their daughter an Olympic jersey in a country she'd never trained in. Aleah has 3 sisters, and one of them, Sarah, came agonizingly close to the Olympics herself, sitting as a U.S. alternate for the London 2012 Games without ever getting the call. That near miss didn't disappear, it just waited, quietly, for someone else in the family to finish the job. Aleah started gymnastics at 2 years old, and by 2008, the family had relocated to Kansas City so she could train under Al Fong at Great American Gymnastics Express, a gym with a reputation for turning raw talent into national team material. She grew up entirely inside the American system. American coaches, American meets, American ambitions. There was no reason, at that point, to think her career would one day be defined by a country her mother had left as a teenager, a country Aleah herself had only ever visited as a tourist. She built a real elite career representing the United States. She competed at the highest domestic level as a teenager, working her way through the same brutal qualifying pipeline that decides who eventually gets a shot at Team USA. Then came 2021. A pair of foot surgeries had already slowed her down, and at the U.S. Championships that year, in what she assumed at the time was her final competition as an elite gymnast, her body simply told her it was over. She's described that ending as heartbreaking, not a farewell tour, not a highlight reel moment. Just the quiet, painful kind of exit most elite athletes eventually face, except hers arrived earlier than she'd hoped. She enrolled at LSU that fall and settled into college gymnastics, trading the crushing weight of individual elite competition for the team-first culture of the NCAA. For a while, that seemed like the whole story. A promising elite career, closed early, and a new chapter that had nothing to do with the country her mother came from. Then, in 2022, something shifted. Quietly, without fanfare, Finnegan made the decision to represent the Philippines internationally instead of the country she'd competed for her entire life. It wasn't framed as a comeback. It was framed as a door she wasn't sure she wanted to open again, walked through anyway, because the connection to her mother's homeland mattered enough to try. Here's a question worth sitting with for a second. How many athletes get a legitimate second act in the exact sport they thought had already finished with them? Drop your answer in the comments, because what happened next is the part almost nobody outside the gymnastics world knows about. Her return didn't start with fireworks. She competed for the Philippines in regional events, building results piece by piece, rather than announcing herself with one big statement. And then, in 2023, at the World Championships in Antwerp, Belgium, she did something that had never been done before in her sports history for her adopted country. Every single national record the Philippines had on the books in women's artistic gymnastics, across every discipline, in that competition, Finnegan broke it. Not one event. Not one number, the entire set. In doing so, she also secured an individual quota spot for the Paris 2024 Olympics, becoming the first Filipina gymnast in history to earn that spot through open international qualification. No wild card, no special allocation, just performance against athletes from more than 80 national federations. Sit with that for a second because it's the piece that actually explains the world records conversation swirling around her name online. She isn't setting marks. Nobody on earth has ever touched. Nobody's claiming that, and if a title or a thumbnail somewhere suggested otherwise, it's worth being straight about it. What she's doing is something almost as rare in its own way. She is the record book for an entire country, rewriting it from scratch, twice, in 2 different Olympic cycles, in a sport where most nations never produce a single world championship finalist at all. For the Philippines, there was no previous ceiling to compare her to. She built the ceiling herself, then broke through it again 2 years later. Paris, July 28, 2024, Bercy Arena. Finnegan became the first Filipina gymnast to compete at the Olympics in 60 years. The last had been Maria Luisa Floro and Evelyn Magluyan, back in Tokyo in 1964, a gap spanning 6 decades and multiple generations of Philippine gymnastics that had never produced another qualifier. She was also the first active LSU gymnast in program history to become an Olympian, a genuine crossover between her college program and the country she now represented. Competing as one of 3 individual gymnasts for Team Philippines, she opened shaky on beam, then answered with a high-energy floor routine that scored 12.733, a strong vault that hit 13.733, and closed her Olympic debut on bars with a 12.566. Her total all-around score in qualifying came to 50.498, enough to make history, though not enough to break into the finals field. "Today, all my little girl dreams came true," she said afterward, "an Olympian for life. I truly enjoyed every single second of today's competition." Back at LSU that same year, she was crowned the 2024 NCAA floor exercise champion with a 9.9625, part of a senior class that helped the Tigers win the program's first ever NCAA team title. An Olympian and a national champion in the same 12 months, wearing 2 different jerseys for 2 entirely different institutions she called home, excelling at both instead of sacrificing either one. Now here's where the story stops being just about her. While Finnegan's own Olympic qualification was locking into place in February 2024, Manny Pacquiao, the only 8-division world boxing champion in history, a man whose fights once emptied entire Filipino cities as families gathered around televisions the way other countries gather for a national holiday, formally petitioned the International Olympic Committee for a special exemption to compete at the Paris Games at 45 years old. The IOC said no, flatly and on paper. Boxing's Olympic age limit sat at 40, 5 full years below where Pacquiao stood, and the Philippine Olympic Committee's attempt to use the universality rule, a provision meant for underrepresented nations, didn't apply either, because the IOC noted the Philippines had already sent more than 8 individual sport athletes to each of the previous 2 games. "I respect the decision of the IOC regarding my request to compete in the 2024 Paris Olympics," Pacquiao said in a statement. "While I am very saddened and disappointed, I understand and accept the age limit rules." The head of the Philippine Olympic Committee called it a shame that their beloved boxing icon had been disqualified. At the exact moment that door closed for the most famous athlete his country had ever produced, 4 other Filipino athletes were already standing on the other side of it: pole vaulter E.J. Obiena, boxer Eumir Marcial, gymnast Carlos Yulo, and Aleah Finnegan. A national legend spent his entire adult life becoming famous enough to be denied an Olympic stage. In the same year, a girl who grew up in Missouri quietly walked onto one wearing his country's flag. If you're the kind of person who likes finding these strange, real-life collisions of timing and history, this channel exists for exactly that. New stories like this one go up regularly, and subscribing means you won't miss the next athlete whose path crosses somewhere nobody expected. Since graduating high-profile competition rounds behind her at LSU, Finnegan leaned fully into a life split genuinely across two countries rather than treating one as a footnote to the other. She spent months living in Manila, taking dance classes, going rock climbing, building an actual day-to-day life inside the country she represents on the biggest stages in her sport, rather than simply flying in for competitions and leaving the moment the meet ended. Then came October 2025, and the second time she rewrote the record book. At the World Championships in Jakarta, competing in the all-around qualifiers, Finnegan was carrying something no scoreboard shows. Her maternal grandmother, Catalina Cruz, had passed away at 92 in the days surrounding the competition. She competed anyway, banking on a strong vault score of 13.40 to help her post 49,299 points across all four events, finishing 33rd in the all-around, one spot from advancing into the Elite 24 athlete final. Along the way, she broke two more of her own Philippine national records, improving her vault ranking to 15th and her bars ranking to 67th, both better than the marks she'd set in Antwerp 2 years earlier. "I am proud of how Team Philippines did," she said afterward. "This being my second World Championships, I felt I was more prepared for this meet. But scores aside, I am proud of how we performed today." She'd also been fighting the flu in the weeks before Jakarta, playing it conservative on floor specifically to protect her body, and still walked away having improved on her own national history while burying a grandmother she loved. 2 months later, in December 2025, at the Southeast Asian Games in Thailand, she delivered what she called her most special medal yet. In the women's vault final, the scoreboard initially showed her in silver position behind Vietnam's Thi Kien Nu Nguyen. Then, after roughly an hour of recalculation to correct a scoring error, officials confirmed Finnegan's actual mark, 13.433. Gold, her third career SEA Games vault title. "Not only for the hardships I endured," she said of the win, referencing her grandmother's death and her ongoing move into Filipino life, but also for the anxious moments before it got certified. A medal delayed by an hour of math, earned in the middle of a year that had already taken something irreplaceable from her. A kid from St. Louis who once believed her competitive career had quietly ended in 2021 is now, by any reasonable measure, the most accomplished gymnast the Philippines has ever produced, holding national records across multiple disciplines, an Olympian, an NCAA champion, and a 2-time World Championship record breaker for a country that had nobody to compare her to before she showed up. She's already said she isn't ruling out a run at Los Angeles 2028. "Never say never," she put it, when asked directly. So here's the actual question worth asking, the one underneath every exaggerated headline about world records and stunned boxing legends. Does a girl who has already rewritten her adopted country's record book twice, while grieving, while sick, while quietly building a life 8,000 miles from where she was born, get a third chance to do it on the biggest stage in the sport? Tell me what you think happens in 2028, and if this is the first time you've heard the full version of Aleah Finnegan's story instead of the clickbait version, that's exactly the kind of gap this channel exists to fill. Subscribe if you want the real story behind the next headline before everyone else finds it.